On November 16th, Chileans will head to the polls for the first round of a presidential vote. In fact, they've got no choice. They have to show up or face a fine. This is Karin Zasesavea Online. Compulsory voting is back in Chile's presidential elections for the first time since 2012. The return to mandatory voting was an initiative of the outgoing government of Gabriel Boric.
Aprobado.
Satisfacción en el gobierno luego de lograr aprobar el voto obligatorio con multa y elevar los requisitos.
And now, as Chileans consider who will succeed him, his government's compulsory vote initiative could play a role in the outcome of this year's elections.
And I think that compulsory voting is the avenue for the expression of the centrist vote, especially the vote of the elderly population, our parents and grandparents who lived through the dictatorship and the return of democracy and who value consensus and centrist moderate options.
That was Paz Zárate, an international lawyer and columnist in Chile, who joins us on this episode. Two groups may substantially increase their turnout this year: the elderly and naturalized Venezuelan migrants, whose numbers on the voter rolls have increased 17-fold since the last election. They'll be picking between the 8 presidential candidates on the ballot. 4 candidates on the right are polling in the double digits. They're all trying to court voters frustrated with Boric's presidency, along with rising levels of crime and a backlash against migration.
They were not able to agree on having a primary for the right wing. It should have happened. It didn't happen. They couldn't agree. They all thought they will take advantage of the fact that they had a spot on their first round. And I think the voters are undecided and switching their loyalties from one candidate to the other depending on the latest debate, the latest news or commentary. And so it's all very fickle.
In this episode, Zárate speaks with ASCOA Online's Chase Harrison as she digs into the field of candidates and details how global figures like Trump and Milei are shaping the race. Thank you for joining us. Wherever you're tuning in, we've got listeners everywhere from Lagos to Lima to Lyon. So don't forget to subscribe to and share Latin American Focus on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice.
You're listening to Latin America in Focus.
Latinoamérica en Foco.
América Latina em Foco.
A podcast by America Society, Council of the Americas on politics, economics, and culture in the region.
Paz, welcome to the Latin America in Focus podcast.
Thank you, Chase. It's a pleasure.
I wanted to start our conversation by rewinding a little bit back to Chile's last presidential election in 2021. It was a very particular moment for the country. It was coming off this large social demonstration known as the Estallido Social. In 2020, it had just had a referendum where Chileans overwhelmingly voted that they wanted to revise their constitution. And it's coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in these conditions, a 35-year-old former student protester, Congressman Gabriel Boric, wins the presidency by a larger margin than expected on a wave of idealism. That was 4 years ago. What's the mood like now in 2025 before this presidential election?
I think it's hard to describe the mood. I was here for the last election and I was surprised at the result. And I think now nobody knows very much what to expect. I think, first of all, in terms of changing the constitution, I think that project has been abandoned. Even though as the idea have a lot of support, and that explains why we engage in that constitutional process, it was an experiment. And I think it was badly designed, and that explains why we had 2 drafts that were ideologically opposed. And I think because it was obligatory, compulsory voting, then I think the majority of Chileans decided that they wanted to perhaps stick with what we have. And then in terms of politics, this time around, I think we are in a moment where personalities count for a lot. And I think personality also played in favor of Gabriel Boric, because even I think at the time, the comparison between Boric, then member of Congress, and now president, and then Jose Antonio Caz, who's now again a candidate, these are very, very different personalities. And now we have many, many candidates, too many, in fact, 8. And so this feels a little bit like a primary, although it's not a primary election. And nobody knows whether to believe the opinion polls or not. So myself, I don't really know what to expect. And that, I think, sums up a little bit where we are.
Let's dig into those 8 candidates to understand what is going through a Chilean's mind when they're trying to decide who to vote for in the first round. 4 of those 8 candidates are considered on the right, and all of them are polling either in the double digits or somewhere near the double digits. That includes 2 candidates who have previously made presidential runoffs in Chile, Jose Antonio Cast, who you mentioned, and Evelyn Matei. It also includes Johannes Kaiser, a far-right congressman, and Franco Parisi, a radio host. How are Chileans deciding between 4 candidates on the right? Is personality once again a major factor here?
I think this demonstrates that it's inconvenient, the fact that they were not able to agree on having a primary for the right wing. It should have happened. It didn't happen. They couldn't agree. They all thought they will take advantage of the fact that they had a spot on their first round, and I think the voters are undecided and switching their loyalties from one candidate to the other depending on the latest debate, the latest news or commentary on an event, and so it's all very fickle, the decision making for the voters on the right and the center right, because the truth is that Matei, although she's center right, I think she's grabbing votes that belong to the center left, because on the left the candidate comes from the Communist Party, and a lot of people who have voted for the center left don't feel interpreted by the Communist Party and therefore are choosing to vote Matei. So I think this is I think a great factor of uncertainty, and the problem is that I think for Matei, Kaiser, and Paris, they are pulling more or less the same. And so if a primary had taken place, I think the definition of the platform for each candidate will be clearer. And therefore, now I think it will be a more clear result as to who could possibly be the third candidate. Because unless something happens in the last 4 weeks, then it looks like Jose Antonio Caz will finally make it. But the second round is a different story, because relationships between the candidates are not very good in general.
Yeah, I want to ask about that. So, if the first round is serving as this proxy primary for the right, should we
Correct.
expect that the right will unify over whichever candidate makes the second round, or is there a scenario where there isn't unity?
There isn't a lot of ground for unity. Kaiser and Cast, they are closer to each other in terms of what they stand for. Maybe, well, Kaiser is a lot tougher, more extreme, more to the right than Cast. Cast has been trying to make an effort to be less extreme. He was quite extreme in this previous attempt. And but the relationship has really soured between Matei and Cast. And I think because the most important voices in the Matei campaign are center voices and even center left voices, former Concertación voices, then I think it's unlikely that she will pledge support for Jose Antonio Cast. But I think if he were to make it, and there's a big if, then probably she will leave the voters the opportunity to decide whatever they think is best. But I don't think she personally, having been the victim of a smear campaign online, she has been very vocal about that, how offensive those campaigns against her were. I don't think she would personally be in a position to pledge allegiance to the gas campaign.
These candidates on the right are operating in a global environment where two figures on the right have gained a lot of prominence. That would be Argentine President Javier Milei, just to the east of Chile, and US President Donald Trump in the United States. How are these two presidents shaping Chile's presidential race?
I think Javier Milei has been closely watched by the right, the Chilean right, with the view of copying some of his economic recipes, widely speaking. Because, of course, the problems of Argentina are very different from the problems of Chile. Argentina has had a protectionist economy, a part of Mercosur, and Chile's a liberalized economy, has been for 35 plus years a very open economy with the widest network of free trade agreements in the world. So you will see that, the parallelism maybe are about, making the economy a little bit more dynamic, but that's about it. I don't think you can compare Chilean economy and the Argentinian economy at all. Also, talking about foreign the regime of foreign investment, foreign direct investment, which is one of my fields of specialization. Again, no comparison. Argentina has not been a safe place for foreign investment, and Chile is a very safe place for foreign investment. That explains actually the growth of the country and its development largely for the last 30 years. So Milei is an interesting case always to watch. Jose Antonio Cas, who is a personal friend of Milei, has distanced himself from Milei, doesn't mention him at all. And when he was asked about what are any international figures that you admire or would like to get close to as president, he couldn't mention Javier Milei, which was the obvious answer. And he said, Giorgia Meloni. Matei also had some interest in some economic proposals of the Argentine team, but in the end, she has been not mentioning the issue of Milei at all during the campaign. So again, distancing herself from Milei. As for Trump, I'm surprised it hasn't been an issue at all. No one mentions Trump, which I think is a mistake. Or what are we going to do if in the future, suddenly, we have tariffs coming at us? Because the problem with tariffs and Trump is that this can happen very suddenly. There can be a turn of events, and how we could possibly defend our country, protect our country, uh, because we are vulnerable. The fact that we are so open to the world is an opportunity, and under this current circumstance is also a vulnerability.
Let's move from the right to the left. The candidate of the left and of Boric's government coalition is Janet Jara. She was a labor minister for Boric, and she's leading the polls right now, though the polls would also predict that she would lose in a runoff scenario. How is Jara framing her campaign? Is she defending the Boric administration? And is Boric playing a role in this election? Is he campaigning with her?
He's definitely playing a role in the election. He and his ministers comment on issues that are part of the discussion among the candidates. So he's been criticized for that because he hasn't been able to just keep to government functions, and instead he's been definitely playing a role and influencing perhaps a little bit the campaign. Jara has had a hard time trying to draw the line between loyalty to Boric, and obviously because the president gave her the opportunity to be a minister. She was a distinguished minister who was able to pass an important labor and pension reform, and also trying to come up with her own ideas as to how she will govern where she elected as president. It hasn't been easy, but also there's another factor that has been playing in her performance. that maybe because she's unexperienced in large campaigns, and really her most important position has been just recently as minister the past 3.5 years, then maybe when it comes to debates, she really hasn't showed her best side. She's very personable and a warm type of personality. It reminds a little bit of Michelle Bachelet. But when it comes to explaining what her proposals, then sometimes she makes mistakes or she forgets what's in her manifesto. And this has happened several times, several debates or TV interviews that she looks confused, and that hasn't helped her. Generally, there's dissatisfaction in the center left with her performance, yet people are still voting for her. And there's another sector of the center left that refuses to say what they're going to do. They say, I don't have a clear candidate. And you can hear from those that say, those people in the center left saying that they don't have a candidate. Actually, what they mean is that reluctantly they will vote Matei, but they can't say it. So this is why I think there's still a factor of uncertainty that polls are unable to measure, and that could lead to surprising results on the day.
I want to dig into one other factor of uncertainty in this election, which is that voting is once again compulsory in Chile. For the first time in several elections, turnout in Chilean presidential elections has hovered around 60% in the past couple contests. But now, if voters don't vote, they face a steep fine. What can we expect from voters who traditionally don't vote who might turn out in this election?
Yes, I think that we have two factors that we have to take into account. One factor is for sure what you're mentioning, compulsory voting, and the other factor is the voting by migrants. Because in Chile is very generous in terms of laws. When the migrants are there, and many of them are from Venezuela, they have been here for 5 years, they are able to vote.
Can I give a statistic to that?
Yeah, of course, by all means.
In 2021, only about 16,000 Venezuelan migrants were eligible to vote in the Chilean election. This year, that number hovers around 250,000 voters.
Yes, it's significant. It's significant. And the other factor, as you mentioned, compulsory voting, it's something that we had abandoned for a number of years. So it has returned. First, it did return for the votes we had on the constitutional drafts. And I think that compulsory voting is the avenue for the expression of the centrist vote, especially the vote of the elderly population, our parents and grandparents who lived through the dictatorship and the return of democracy and who value consensus and centrist moderate options. And then the voting of migrants, especially Venezuelan migrants, and I think they also tend to favor the rights. Although I think pollsters are considering at least part of the migrant vote, but not as much the elderly population. I think nobody expected, in fact, the result that we had for the first rechazo, which was 60% of the votes, and polls were giving it at most 46. So polls were widely wrong then. I think there's ground to believe that they may be wrong again now.
So, Paz, we have all these new migrant voters in the country, but they're going to be voting in a context where migration and anti-migration sentiment has featured heavily in this election. Migration and also insecurity are consistently ranked by Chileans as the principal problems in their country. How are voters thinking about these two issues?
Well, I think this is an issue where you find a coincidence between the manifestos of all the candidates, because the sentiment is so, I think, universally shared that the country was unprepared for the large influx of migrants that we have received, that we need to do something about it. And also because public services are under a lot of stress. Even on the part of Janet Jara, who traditionally has been the kinder to migrants and the most generous in her positions as a position of the left regarding migration. And now she features on her TV spots as addressing this with drones and some kind of virtual wall, apart from physical walls that we have at the border with Bolivia and Peru, and trying to show herself that she will be tough on migrants. And you see, that's the sector that used to be the most generous. So imagine how the other ones are treating the issue. And I think this comes very starkly in the TV spots for all the candidates. As to security, I think that definitely tops the list as the most pressing issue. And I think in people's minds, it's linked to migration. Um, no doubt the statistics show that the country has changed, that there's the feeling of vulnerability widely shared, and that everyone expects whoever wins the election to do drastic changes when it comes to security, to reinforce the police, to reinforce the expelling of migrants, and to build prisons, large prisons. Some of them, in the case of the extreme right, Bukele style. We didn't mention Bukele. He hasn't been specifically discussed by the candidate, but he has, I think, inspired some of the measures, especially on the extreme right, as to how to fight crime successfully.
That was a little bit of the domestic affairs that are animating the election. What about international affairs? Gabriel Boric was a very outward-facing president. He was a big international voice. Are foreign affairs factoring into this election?
Actually, no, and that's very regrettable. Of all candidates, only Matei has drawn a complete proposal on foreign policy. The rest, if you look at their manifestos, they don't include foreign policy. Jara has only very recently, maybe a few days ago, presented an addenda to her manifesto, which contains a page or less than a page on foreign policy, but it comes a little bit late. Cass doesn't have anything, and the rest don't have anything. And so that makes you think why, at the time when geopolitics plays such an important role globally, that the country that is in the region is the best connected to the world doesn't seem to have any ideas as to how to manage or what's Chile's place in the world. In one debate, the issue did come up, and then because most candidates don't have a manifesto, then they were asked what figures, personalities in the international arena do you admire and think our country should be closer to? So instead of policy, they had to ask again about personality. And just the answers show that they haven't really thought on these. Most of them, they haven't really thought about these issues. Maybe Matei has thought up a little bit more because she's an economist by training. So she mentioned Mark Carney as an interesting figure, and especially given the way that he has defended the Canadian economy, which I think is a good answer. She was not given space to explain, but obviously it suggests that she has thought about it. Cass mentioned Giorgia Meloni, but I'm convinced it took him a long time to actually come up with a name. So it was an uncomfortable pause. And Janet Jara also took some time to say Claudia Sheinbaum without really explaining why, saying because she's a woman and nothing else. So I am personally concerned that they are unprepared, that they may be surprised about new tariffs, that they don't seem to have a contingency plan, that they haven't thought about how to defend Chilean trade and producers and exporters, and that in the end, the economy, our economy, in large part, they seems to be dependent on a factor that we can control, and that's the imposition of tariffs. So, but I'm not losing hope that in coming debate, the issue will perhaps come up and we will hear better answers. I think it's an indispensable part of any candidate manifesto in the current world global tech affairs.
If no candidate reaches above 50%, there will be a runoff on December 14th. So still plenty of time for candidates to better define their policy positions, and for some of that uncertainty, though probably not all of it, to dissipate. Paz, thank you so much for coming on the Latin America in Focus podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Chase.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Karin Zissis. This episode was produced by Chase Harrison with executive producer Luisa Leme. We're covering all of Latin America's elections from the last races of 2025 to the big ones on the horizon in 2026. Check our website for poll trackers, candidate comparisons, and more. You can find other episodes of Latin American Focus at www.as-coa.org/podcast. Or write us an email telling us what you think at latinfocus@as-coa.org. Share this episode and the show with other Latin America aficionados and subscribe at Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. The music in this podcast is Sobre tu Playa by Inti Ijimani, performed for America Society. Find out about upcoming concerts at musicoftheamericas.org. Check the episode notes to learn how to become an America Society member and get preferential seating in concerts, as well as access to arts and cultural events. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of America Society, Council of the Americas, or its members. Thank you.